again, those of you that have done CSS, you're probably looking at my demos thus far, and you're probably complaining about two very big things. The first thing that you're probably complaining about is the fact that I'm putting all my CSS into that file. Again, I'm doing that just to make my demos easier. The second thing you're probably complaining about is you'll notice that I've hard-coded in all of those font sizes. So I said that I want it to be 20 pixels and 36 pixels and so forth. That's really not a good practice, because the problem with that is that as things resize, I would then have to go into each item and resize it. So if I wanted a different font size for mobile, and I wanted a different font size for tablets, and I wanted a different font size for printing, I would then have to go in and resize everything. And I've got way too many better things to do with my time than try to, resize everything. So let's have a discussion then about sizing and about some sizing best practices here. Now, you are going to notice that CSS does give you the ability to do absolute sizes. And I'm going to say right away, just stay away from centimeters, millimeters, and inches, because it's never going to come out the way that you want it to. Just stay away from those, and really focus in on picas, points, pixels, and for me personally, I don't know if you use something different. I always find myself reaching for pixels, just because I find that I get the most consistency across all devices, and I find that it comes out the best. I don't know if you're different. Okay.
I do the same. Also, I mean, when you're sizing things besides text, you usually would use pixels or use something relative. So pixels, just across the board, it's good.
Yeah, exactly. Now, the thing about pixels is that it's an absolute size. So if I say I want something to be this many pixels, guess how big it's going to be? That many pixels. Period. End of sentence. Well, wouldn't it be nice if we could just set a size somewhere as our base, and then size everything else based off of that base? And that's where our relative sizes come into play. Now, the two main relative sizes that I want to highlight here are EM and REM. Now, EM is based on the font size of the current element. So if I go in and I set up, let's say div, and I set that to be 16 pixels, and I want to do something based on that for the first letter, then I would want to use EM because it's based on the current element. REM, however, is an 80s, 90s alternative band. No, REM is based on the size of the HTML element, which, by the way, is 16 pixels by default. So let's actually go back in and kind of size things a little bit better here. So you'll notice 16 pixels up top. So rather than me going in and saying our font size of 20 pixels, let's size it based off of that main font. So I just want it a bit bigger than that main font. So let's say that I want that to be about 25% bigger. So 1.25 of REM. So you can think about it as a percent. That's always the way that I think about it. So 125% or 1.25 of that REM. So it's going to be a little bit bigger. And in the case of our first, we want that much, much bigger. So let's go in and maybe set that to be 2.25 REM. And in this particular case, we want that, a scotch bigger. And let's go in and say 1.50 REM. And do I have any other sizes in here? I think I'm good. I'm good. Okay, cool. So now let's come back over to my browser and let's go ahead and hit refresh. And you're going to notice there's not a lot of change on my screen, because I basically kept everything reasonably close. And unless you're, busting out a ruler and measuring everything, you're probably not noticing any real difference until I do this. So all it takes now is for me to make one change. And I'm going to make a drastic change here. I'm going to change this to 10, which I know is very, very small. But the takeaway that I want you to get is that the moment I do that, everything else goes in line with it. And I really should also have updated this as well. Let's go 1.25 REM. There we go. And so now, if I resize that, you'll notice everything else goes in line with it. And this becomes very powerful when we're talking about our page layouts and our media queries, because I'm going to want to be able to resize our fonts for tablets and for desktops. And I don't want to have to go in, especially if I've got something like this, where, I've got, like 4 or 5 different options now for div tags and all sorts of different font sizes. I don't want to have to go in and resize each one of those for each individual screen size. So I don't have to. So all I have to do is one single update and everything else falls in line. Make your life easier. Go with relative sizes. Set that size once and go relative from there on out. If you need something to be an explicit size, then obviously, yes, use explicit sizing. But especially when you're talking about things like fonts and trying to work in a mobile-first world, go with relative sizes. It's going to make your life that much easier.
Yeah. So what would have happened if you changed it from REM to EM?
That's a fantastic question. So if I would have changed it from REM to EM, so let's do this. I'm going to go with kind of the big one here, which is our first letter. Actually, no. What do I want? I want this. I'm going to change this to EM, and I'm going to go really big here. So I'm going to go 3 EM, and I'm going to go in, and I'm going to hit refresh here. And you'll notice that I'm getting a much bigger space there because of the fact that it's still coming off of my HTML. So it's coming off of the parent because that's now flowing down to everything else. So EM versus REM here isn't going to make a huge difference. But let's talk about this first letter and this first line, because that's really where EM shines. Because remember, what's my goal? My goal with using that first line and that first letter was really to try and highlight that versus the rest of the paragraph. So I want that to be bigger based on the rest of the paragraph. So that's where EM is going to shine. So I don't want to do it based off the rest of the document. I want to do it based off of this. So I want it to be much bigger than the rest of that. So maybe I want that first letter to be 3 times as big as that div section. And I want that first line to be, let's say, 2 times as big as that div section. So I go in and I say 3 EM and I say 2 AM, and I come back and I hit refresh, and you'll notice it's nice and big. Now let's again kind of keep going with that compare and contrast here. Where's my div tags? Trying to think of a really good... okay, let's go off of first child here. And I'm going to explicitly size my first child here. I think this is going to kind of bring it all together here. And I'm going to make this really big. I'm going to say 30 pixels. Okay, now this is going to be, I think, a good example of REM versus EM. EM is going to be based off of this, because I've now said that that first child, I want that to be 30 pixels. EM is going to be based off of that. So this should be 90 pixels big, as opposed to whatever was inside of HTML, which, if I remember right, was currently set to 10, so it should be 30. So if it was REM, that would be 30. EM is going to be 90 pixels. I think I'm doing my math right. Hit save, hit refresh. Yes, that's 90 pixels. So you'll notice that that's huge, and you'll also notice, kind of as a perfect example, that that up there wasn't impacted. That's still going to be, in this case, our 10 pixels. So there's the difference in action of EM versus REM. So EM is based off of that current element. REM is based off of whatever was set on HTML. Does that bring that together?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Cool. All right. Now, up until now, I've got to fix that. Hold on one second. Control Z. That's just going to drive me crazy. Control Z and Control Z, and let's go back and change that to 16. Okay. Now then. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this back up in Internet Explorer, and I'm going to fire up Chrome here. Now, what you're going to notice is on the whole, these are similar, but you are, going to notice that they're certainly not the same, that the font size is definitely different in Chrome versus IE. And this is going to be one of the biggest challenges that you're going to have working with CSS is that, like you mentioned earlier, and I think you put it perfectly, which was essentially that CSS is a standard by the W3C, and they essentially suggest that browsers do this, this, and this, but it's not a requirement by any stretch of the imagination. So a lot of different things will work in one browser, but won't necessarily work in another browser. And sometimes the difference is going to be pretty drastic. Sometimes it's not going to be as bad. So you will always have to go in and play around from browser to browser to browser to make sure that things work well in all browsers, or at least are kind of close enough in all browsers. And so you'll notice on the sizing here that the sizing is going to be handled. Oh, wait a minute. No, I'm sorry. There we go. See, it was funny because I'm looking at this and I'm going, I know that all of that's supposed to work in Chrome and it's not, and I'm just going to kind of roll with it. There we go. Okay, so all of that works better. There we go. Now, here's one spot where things can differ, and Chrome may have updated this real recently. So if all of a sudden this works the way that it's supposed to work in Chrome, then they updated it. One very cool thing that you can do is you can also size things based on the screen size. And that's by using VW or VH. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that it's not supported in all browsers. And you'll notice that it winds up being that unit of measurement is 1% of the viewport, so the portion of the screen that you're currently looking at, the width and the height. So if I go back in to Visual Studio here, and let me grab my article, and let's say that I want my article's width, and I only want that to take up, let's say, 75% of the screen, I could say 75 VW, viewport width. And so if I go in and I hit save, and I come back over here to Chrome, and I come back over here to Internet Explorer, okay, cool. Chrome did update this. This actually is relatively new. What you're gonna notice is that there is now that little bit of white space, and it's all based on the size of the browser. Now, the point that I was really trying to make here, kind of bringing it all the way back to where I started by opening up Chrome, is you do have to be careful with CSS because things change over time. So it was like 2 months ago that I last went in and kind of worked around with that, and that wasn't there, that wasn't supported. It is now supported. You always have to test in all browsers. Always have to test in all browsers. Okay. All right. Anything else to there?
I think that was a really good explanation of the different sizes. I think especially a discussion of REM versus EM, that sizing thing.
Yeah.
Great explanation.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Thank you. All right. Well, with that, let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break. And then we're going to come on back and we're going to take a look at page layout. So we took a look at how to go in and select all of our items. Now it's time to actually examine how we can put things where we want them and stop using tables. All right, we'll see you guys in 10 minutes.